2 days ago, 4 astronauts splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, and for the first time in over 50 years, human beings had been to the moon and come back alive. Artemis II is over. The capsule is on the deck of the USS John P. Murtha. Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Cook, and Jeremy Hansen are back in Houston getting poked and prodded by flight surgeons. The heat shield is being photographed inch by inch, and somewhere inside the vehicle assembly building at Kennedy Space Center, another rocket is already being stacked. NASA is not pausing to celebrate. They can't afford to, because what comes after Artemis II is so ambitious, so technically demanding, and so compressed in its timeline that the agency is essentially asking itself to do in 2 years what it spent the last decade preparing for. And the thing most people don't realize is that the splashdown on April 10th wasn't just the end of a mission. It was the starting gun for the most aggressive lunar campaign since Apollo. So what exactly is NASA building toward? 3 missions in roughly 2 years. A lander test that has never been attempted. A crewed lunar landing for the first time since 1972, and the beginning of a permanent base on the moon's south pole. All of it hinging on hardware that, as of today, has never carried a human being. The immediate priority is the heat shield. During Artemis I, back in November 2022, the unmanned Orion capsule came home with its Avcoat heat shield chewed up in ways nobody predicted. Chunks of charred material had broken away during re-entry, leaving divots and cracks across the surface. The shield still protected the spacecraft. Temperatures inside never exceeded design limits, but the damage pattern did not match the computer models. That made people nervous. For Artemis II, NASA modified the re-entry profile to limit how long Orion spent in the temperature range that caused the problem. Engineers shortened the skip distance, the arc the capsule traces when it bounces off the upper atmosphere before plunging back in for its final descent. It worked. The crew came home safe, but during the post-splashdown news conference on Friday night, Orion program manager Howard Hu confirmed what everyone expected. The shield came back with divots again, cracking, signs of uneven ablation. Divers were in the water within minutes photographing the damage, and aircraft tracked the capsule's fiery re-entry to capture thermal data in real time. NASA knew this was coming. They flew the mission anyway because they believed the underlying structure would hold, and it did. The 4 astronauts hit the atmosphere at Mach 33, roughly 25,000 miles per hour, endured a 6-minute communications blackout while plasma wrapped around the capsule at temperatures that can reach up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, experienced nearly 4 Gs of deceleration, and splashed down right on time at 8:07 p.m. Eastern, about 1,956 miles downrange from where they entered the atmosphere, off the coast of San Diego. Every parachute opened. Every system performed. The crew walked off the recovery helicopter under their own power. The mission itself had been nearly flawless across 10 days. Artemis II launched on April 1st from Kennedy Space Center at 6:35 p.m. Eastern. The crew spent the first day in a high Earth orbit running systems checks, then fired their engines to push Orion toward the moon. 3 days later, on April 6th, they swung around the far side, passing within about 4,070 miles of the lunar surface. During that flyby, they documented terrain on the far side that no human eye had ever seen directly. They photographed craters, mountains, and geological features that, until now, existed only as data points from robotic orbiters. And then, in a moment nobody had fully anticipated, when the mission was originally targeting a February launch, the moon drifted between the spacecraft and the sun. A total solar eclipse, seen from beyond the moon, with totality lasting nearly 54 minutes. Victor Glover said it looked unreal. They also broke Apollo 13's distance record, reaching 252,756 miles from Earth. That record had stood for 56 years. Hansen, a former fighter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, became the first Canadian ever to fly beyond low Earth orbit. Cook, who already held the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman at 328 days on the International Space Station, added another first. Glover became the first black astronaut to fly to the moon. But the heat shield issue is not resolved. It is being studied. And it is not the only problem. During the post-splashdown news conference, mission managers listed several systems that need attention before Artemis III flies. Orion's service module requires a valve redesign. The toilet malfunctioned during the mission, a problem that sounds minor until you realize 4 people are locked inside a capsule the size of a large SUV for 10 days with no way to open a window. NASA Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya acknowledged the timeline is tight. The turnaround between now and Artemis III is roughly 15 months, and the agency is still learning how to move at the pace its own schedule demands. His words were blunt: keep flying, keep learning, keep iterating. The fix for the heat shield, a redesigned AVCoat formulation with better permeability, is already being built into the Artemis III and IV capsules. The question NASA faces right now is whether the data from Friday's re-entry, combined with the Artemis I data, gives them enough confidence to certify the new design without another unmanned test. The answer to that question shapes the entire schedule going forward. Artemis III is next, and it is not what most people think it is. For years, Artemis III was supposed to be the big one, the mission where humans would land on the moon for the first time since Gene Cernan climbed back into his lunar module in December 1972. 2 astronauts would descend to the lunar South Pole aboard SpaceX's Starship human landing system, spend about a week collecting samples and conducting experiments, and return to Orion in lunar orbit. It was going to be a 30-day mission, the most complex crewed spaceflight ever attempted. That plan is gone. In January 2026, NASA officially delayed Artemis III to no earlier than 2028. Then, just 5 weeks later, on February 27th, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman flipped the script entirely. Artemis III was pulled forward to mid-2027. The catch is that it will not go to the moon, not even close. Instead, Artemis III will launch a crew of 4 aboard Orion on the Space Launch System, fly to low Earth orbit, and attempt something that has never been done with these vehicles. The crew will rendezvous and dock with one, or possibly both, of the commercial lunar landers, SpaceX's Starship HLS and Blue Origin's Blue Moon, which will have launched separately on their own rockets. The astronauts will physically enter the landers, test propulsion systems, evaluate life support, check communications, and for the first time, try on the new Axiom extravehicular mobility unit spacesuits that future moonwalkers will wear on the surface. Think of it as the Artemis program's dress rehearsal. The comparison NASA keeps making is to Apollo 9 in March 1969, when astronauts Jim McDivitt and Rusty Schweickart flew the lunar module in Earth orbit for the first time, testing rendezvous and docking and spacewalking in the suit that would walk on the moon 4 months later. Apollo 9 never gets the glory that Apollo 11 does. Nobody remembers it as the dramatic one, but without it, Apollo 11 does not happen. Artemis III is that mission. It is the proving ground for every piece of hardware that will carry humans to the lunar surface. And right now, as of this week, NASA has not finalized whether it will dock with one lander or both, whether it will fly in low Earth orbit or a higher orbit that better simulates thermal conditions near the Moon, or which company's vehicle will go first. Those decisions depend partly on how fast SpaceX and Blue Origin can get their landers ready and launched. SpaceX's challenge is staggering. Starship HLS needs to reach orbit, then be refueled by at least 14 separate tanker flights from a pre-positioned propellant depot that SpaceX also has to build and fill. Each tanker flight uses another Starship. The logistics of getting that much liquid methane and liquid oxygen into orbit, transferring it between vehicles that have never done an orbital fuel transfer with crew-rated systems, and then boosting the fully loaded lander to meet Orion, all within a tight launch window, is an engineering problem that would have seemed impossible 10 years ago. It might still be. Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander takes a different approach, smaller and more conventional in some ways, but it too has never flown with humans aboard. Both companies must complete uncrewed lunar landing demonstrations before NASA will allow crew inside. A March report from NASA's Office of the Inspector General noted that these demonstrations will not be fully representative of the crewed vehicles, meaning the first time these landers carry astronauts in their final configuration might be the actual mission. If neither company is ready in time, NASA has a problem. Artemis III without a lander is not Artemis III. It is just another Orion flight. Assuming the lander tests succeed, everything shifts to Artemis IV. Early 2028. The first crewed lunar landing in 56 years. 4 astronauts will launch aboard SLS and Orion and fly to lunar orbit. A commercial lander, either Starship, HLS, or Blue Moon, will already be waiting there, having been launched separately and placed into an elliptical polar orbit with a low point of about 62 miles above the surface. Orion docks with the lander. 2 astronauts transfer inside. They descend. And for the first time since December 14, 1972, human boots press into lunar regolith. The landing site will be near the Moon's south pole, a region that no human and very few robots have ever visited. The South Pole is nothing like the flat equatorial plains where Apollo astronauts bounced around in low gravity under constant sunlight. The South Polar region is a place of permanent shadows, where the floors of certain craters have not seen sunlight in billions of years. Temperatures in those shadows drop to negative 390 degrees Fahrenheit, and trapped in that cold, according to orbital data from instruments like the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, is water ice, possibly a lot of it. If you could stand at the rim of one of those permanently shadowed craters and look down, you would see nothing. Absolute blackness, no atmosphere to scatter light, no reflected glow. Just a void carved into the surface of the Moon, cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide solid, holding ice that may have been delivered by comets billions of years before life existed on Earth. That ice is the reason NASA chose the South Pole. Water means drinking water for astronauts. It means oxygen to breathe. And when you split water into hydrogen and oxygen, it means rocket fuel. The South Pole is not just a scientific destination, it is a gas station for everything that comes after. NASA has identified 9 candidate landing regions near the pole, each containing multiple specific sites. The final selection depends on which lander flies and what its capabilities allow. Some sites offer better access to permanently shadowed regions. Others provide more consistent solar illumination for power generation. All of them are in terrain far rougher and more complex than anything Apollo ever attempted. The 2 astronauts will spend approximately 1 week on the surface. They will conduct at least 2 spacewalks using the Axiom suits tested on Artemis III. They will deploy a seismometer, called the Lunar Environment Monitoring Station, designed to listen to the Moon's internal vibrations and map the structure of its crust and mantle. They will collect samples from a region of the Moon that has never been touched by human hands. And then they will climb back into the lander, ascend to orbit, dock with Orion, and ride home. The whole mission is expected to last about 30 days from launch to splashdown. For context, the longest Apollo surface stay was 3 days. Artemis IV will keep 2 people on the Moon for a week and 4 people in lunar space for a month. The jump in complexity is enormous. Which lander gets the job depends on the results of Artemis III. If SpaceX demonstrates a successful Starship HLS rendezvous and dock in 2027, and their vehicle is certified, Starship flies. If Blue Origin's Blue Moon is ready and performs well, Blue Moon flies. If both are ready, NASA picks whichever vehicle offers the best safety margin. The decision has not been made. It cannot be made until the test data exists, and then, before the dust on Artemis IV's landing site has settled, NASA wants to go back again. Artemis V is targeted for late 2028, just months after Artemis IV. This is where the language changes. This is where NASA stops talking about missions and starts talking about a base. Artemis V will be the second crewed landing. 2 astronauts will descend to the South Pole aboard Blue Origin's Blue Moon lander. They will drive. For the first time since Apollo 17, astronauts will have a rover, a new lunar terrain vehicle designed for the South Polar environment, pre-positioned on the surface by a prior cargo delivery. They will spend about a week exploring, covering more ground than any Apollo crew managed in 3 days with the original lunar rover. But Artemis V's real purpose is construction. This mission is when NASA expects to begin physically building the infrastructure for a permanent lunar outpost. The details are still being defined, but the architecture calls for power generation systems, communication arrays, and mobility platforms delivered to the surface by robotic cargo landers under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program. Artemis V's crew will be the first humans to interact with those pre-deployed systems, activating equipment, connecting modules, verifying that what the robot's placed is where it needs to be and works the way it should. Administrator Isaacman has called this the first phase of a 3-step plan. Phase 1 is build, test, learn. Send equipment, test it, figure out what breaks. Phase 2 adds semi-habitable infrastructure, shelters and workstations that extend how long astronauts can stay. Phase 3 is sustained presence, crews rotating through a functioning base every 6 months, living and working on the Moon for weeks or months at a time. NASA's target for continuous human habitation is 2032. By then, the agency envisions long-duration surface missions using nuclear propulsion to explore craters and regions far from the initial landing site. They plan to use lunar regolith, the powdery soil that covers the surface, for 3D printing structural components and extracting oxygen, water, and raw materials. The Moon stops being a destination and becomes a factory. $20 billion over 7 years. Dozens of missions, commercial partners launching cargo on a cadence that has no historical precedent for lunar operations. A nuclear reactor, one roughly 10,000 times less powerful than a typical terrestrial power plant, but small enough to fit in a car, deployed to the surface to keep the lights on during the 14-day lunar night when solar panels are useless. Isaacman even announced, just before Artemis II launched, that NASA is building an experimental nuclear-powered spacecraft intended to reach Mars by the end of 2028, not to land, but to prove the propulsion concept works. Whether it succeeds or fails, the data feeds directly back into the lunar program. The Lunar Gateway, that orbiting space station near the Moon that NASA had been planning for years, is gone, cancelled in March 2026. The agency decided to redirect the money and engineering talent toward the surface base instead. Modules and hardware originally designed for Gateway are being repurposed. The focus is dirt, not orbit. Boots on the ground, not experiments in a tin can, circling 250,000 miles from help. The SLS rocket itself nearly died too. In May 2025, the Trump administration's budget proposal called for cancelling SLS and Orion after Artemis III, citing the rocket's cost of roughly $4 billion per launch. For a few months, the entire program's future beyond 3 flights was in question. Then, on July 4, 2025, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed into law, and buried in that legislation was funding to keep SLS and Orion flying beyond Artemis III. The rocket survived, but the episode revealed how thin the political ice is beneath a program this expensive. Every election cycle, every budget fight, every shift in priorities at the White House is a potential extinction event for Artemis. There is a race happening that most people are not paying attention to. China's lunar program is moving fast. They have already landed robots on the far side of the moon, something no other country has done. They have returned samples from the lunar surface. Their stated goal is a crewed lunar landing by 2030, with their own plans for a permanent base to follow. NASA's timeline, if it holds, would put American boots on the moon 2 years before China gets there. If it slips, that margin evaporates. None of this is guaranteed. The heat shield needs to work with the new formulation. The landers need to fly. SpaceX needs to figure out orbital refueling at a scale nobody has attempted. 14 tanker flights filling a depot that does not yet exist. Blue Origin needs to deliver a vehicle that has never left the ground. The Axiom suits need to perform in conditions that cannot be fully replicated on Earth. Congress needs to keep funding a program that costs billions per year in an era when budget pressures are relentless. And all of it needs to happen on a schedule that assumes almost nothing goes seriously wrong. Every single link in this chain has to hold. But standing here, 2 days after splashdown, the picture is clearer than it has been in years. Artemis II proved that Orion can keep 4 humans alive in deep space for 10 days. It proved that the heat shield, imperfect as it is, can bring them home from lunar velocity. It proved that the Space Launch System can put crew on a trajectory to the moon and bring them back. It proved that the European Service Module, built by Airbus in Bremen, Germany, can power and propel the spacecraft across nearly 700,000 miles of round-trip travel without a critical failure. Every system that future crews will depend on to reach the lunar surface has now been tested with people inside it. That did not exist 2 weeks ago. Wiseman named a crater after his late wife, Carol, during the flyby. The crew named another after their spacecraft, Integrity. In a moment that caught even Mission Control off guard, they asked permission to do it, and Houston said yes. Those moments mattered. They reminded people what this program is for. Not just data, not just engineering milestones, but the expansion of where human beings can go and what they can see and what they can build when they get there. 15 months from now, if everything holds, another crew climbs into Orion. They will not fly to the moon. They will stay in Earth orbit and practice docking with a lander that is supposed to take the next crew down to the surface. It is not glamorous. It will not break distance records. It might not even trend on social media for more than a day. But it is the mission that makes everything else possible. And after that, the landings begin. One after another, roughly every year, each one building on the last, each one leaving a little more infrastructure behind. Power systems, communication relays, a rover,